Throughout all of human history, we've not only told stories for entertainment, but also to impart lessons. Sometimes you'll hear someone reference something and you already understand the lesson that's to be imparted. Like if I were to say that eating sweet treats is my Achilles heel, you might not remember the full story where Achilles' mother was a goddess and dipped him into the river Styx for him to gain invulnerability. But what you do remember is that even a great strong warrior like Achilles can be brought down by the simplest of weaknesses. I often hear people talk about how they feel like they're living the same day over and over again. But what I rarely hear them talk about is the movie Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day is a movie I usually catch myself watching around the same time of the year, around the holiday. And when it comes to solving the issue of living the same day over and over again, I think the movie actually does a pretty good job of solving that issue. So let's take a look and see what I'm talking about. I want to talk about this movie in sections and try and find a through line and a relation to my question. So to break down the sections, we have Phil before the loop, Phil during his initial realization of the loop and his fun, Phil seducing Rita, Phil's depression, and Phil's happiness. If you haven't seen the movie, then go watch it. I'm not trying to reduce a whole movie into a YouTube video, plus it's amazing. I won't do it justice just by talking about it, but a quick synopsis is this. Groundhog Day is the story of a man that gets trapped in a time loop on Groundhog Day. The protagonist, Phil Connors, played by Bill Murray, is a TV weatherman that is tired of his small news station and is hoping to get a job at a big network. But as he does every year, Phil has to go to the town of Punxsutawney to report on the groundhog. He travels there with his producer Rita, played by Annie McDowell, and cameraman Larry, played by Chris Elliott, to report on the groundhog. When all of a sudden he gets stuck on the same day of February 2nd. Phil learns he's trapped in the time loop and at first is confused. Then he learns that he can do whatever he wants and decides to have fun with it. But he then realizes that life is meaningless and tries to find meaning by seducing Rita. He fails and decides to try and end it all, but he can't even do that as he just wakes up the next day in bed. The last thing Phil does is try to help others in the town of Punxsutawney, and finally Phil finds meaning and happiness and even manages to get Rita in the end. Well, that's obvious. All we have to do is not be selfish, help others, and we won't be miserable in our lives. But that's not really it. Life isn't that simple. Do you think every person in the town helps everybody all the time and doesn't have flaws and doesn't have their own problems to live with? What about the homeless man? How come he's even homeless? Why is he even there? Why doesn't the Helpy Town help him? I think the story of the homeless man is actually an important one for Phil, and I'll get into that much later. But to really learn the lesson of this film, we have to start from a believable place. The concept that the writer Danny Rubin proposed was this: if a man that couldn't change lived long enough, could he change? So what kind of a guy can't change? No, we don't have to go that far. Besides, I'm talking about romance. Okay, I don't think we're understanding the point here. I think when describing Phil's flaws, it's easy to label him as a narcissist. But I feel like that's not good enough for Phil. Phil isn't just this one-note character that turns into a caring guy at the end of the story. Phil's a narcissist, but he has dreams. He cares about aiming higher, making more money, and yeah, that's all just about himself, but he strives towards a goal. He wants to live his life, and he wants to live it big. It's really the town of Punxsutawney that gets in his way. Punxsutawney is seen as a regression for Phil. It's a step back, and I think that this actually sheds light on to Phil being insecure as a person and feeling like he's not good enough.
Being from a small town myself, I always hated the way it made me feel trapped. There was nothing to do there. Any fun I wanted to have, I had to go to the town over. And all the people were old. I always felt like I was being judged. I always heard about someone's son or daughter and what they were doing, or I was asked if I knew this person from school or not. I see the same people every day in the same places. Like whether or not if time froze, they'd be there anyway. I think Groundhog Day inspires this idea of the feeling of sameness. Punxsutawney is especially interesting for Phil as a character because it highlights a big flaw in Phil. It's not only that Phil is self-centered, but Phil also doesn't try to connect with people, which is really interesting because whether it's the character written this way or it's just Bill Murray being himself, Phil is a very funny and charming person, so it wouldn't really be hard for him to connect with people. Phil really never uses his charm or his humor to connect with anybody in the majority of the film, and it's probably because he doesn't see people as worth his time and he has bigger and better things to do. It's really Rita that breaks him out of this mentality. So Is it time that changes the narcissist, or is it love?
Okay, so he's narcissistic, he actively belittles people instead of trying to connect with them, and he's too focused on moving up the career ladder, being more success driven. For the most part, that's basically Phil's character. Now let's talk about the inciting incident. After Phil gets trapped in the town because of a snowstorm, he wakes up the next day being February 2nd, again.
Do you ever have deja vu, Mrs. Lancaster?
He goes through his day thinking things should be different, only to find them exactly the same. I like how the movie doesn't just go through the first day again, but it adds stuff to it and makes it go faster even after the third day. Phil, realizing that things are different, is terrified and wants to solve his issue. Being stuck doing the Groundhog story in the town he hates is Phil's personal hell after all. It's only after realizing the power of his situation, from talking to a drunk Rick DeCummin, that there are no consequences to his actions. So what does anyone who has no consequences in life do? Exactly what you think of. He manipulates and has sex with a woman, steals money from a bank, and then has more sex with a different woman.
I love this film.
Took him 2 Groundhog Days to figure out what was wrong and accept his situation, but took him 2 seconds to start banging chicks and stealing dimes. Now that Phil does accept things, he decides to seek pleasure. In a way, he sees life as now being pointless, so if he's going to live it, he might as well live it by getting the most pleasure possible.
What?
This is where I could talk about the philosophical standpoint. We could talk about the absurdist viewpoints and how this life is meaningless, but Phil should embrace its absurdity and be happy in spite of it. We could also talk about nihilism and how assigning any meaning to a meaningless life is a waste of time, and Phil's initial reaction to be hedonistic and not care about the world around him fits very well. While I think these philosophies are apparent in the movie, I don't think they actually give an answer to Phil. I think absurdism comes close to Phil, but Phil is always reactionary with what he does. Maybe this is the script showing and not telling. It is hard to figure out whether or not Phil actually searches for meaning in the movie at all. Probably because this is a rom-com and assigning meaning or looking too deep is pointless. But I do think this movie is meaningful. Phil's pleasure-seeking comes at a bit of a stop when he's challenged to try and manipulate Rita into sleeping with him. He knows Rita is special, and it takes more work than he realizes. Probably also because Phil isn't just trying to manipulate her. He actually likes her. It's something subtle as the movie goes on because we just see Phil trying to be charming and funny in his narcissistic way. But Phil actually has an interest in her that he doesn't with other characters. Obviously, Andie MacDowell is beautiful, and that's part of it. But also because when Phil is done having his fun flings, he steps up to someone he wants to be more serious about. In this moment, you could say that Phil's looking for something more meaningful, and his attempt to reduce Rita is his first real search for something meaningful outside of himself. But Rita easily puts a stop to that because she understands that even though Phil is making an attempt to be intimate and close with her, she knows that he isn't sincere or genuine. Even after the first successful date that he had with Rita, she pushed him away.
That's for making me care about you.
Thus starting a chain for Phil to try harder. But Phil wasn't understanding Rita and just kept trying to win her over with multiple tries instead of understanding her, or himself. Rita overall is an interesting character for Phil, as she's Phil's foil. She highlights all of his flaws while showing her strengths. A good one is showing how Phil thinks getting to know someone through manipulation is good. Even if he wasn't in a time loop, he'd still probably look for ways to get an advantage by seducing her instead of just being himself. This could be because Phil knows deep down he isn't good enough for Rita. He even says so himself.
I don't deserve someone like you.
A big strength that Rita has and that Phil doesn't is how well Rita can connect with people. This is a point of tension between them because every interaction Phil has with others, Rita notices. Rita cares how people treat others while Phil doesn't. Rita takes her job seriously while Phil doesn't. Rita has interests and hobbies outside of work while Phil doesn't. All of these things are shown time and time again, and Rita's initial reactions to Phil are exactly how she would treat someone who she thought was a narcissistic jerk. It's very clear that at the beginning of the movie she treats him with disdain, and then slowly as time goes on, and as Phil changes, that she starts to treat him differently. This is not only good in showing how Phil changes as a character, but also shows how Phil has to change because you can't hide anything from Rita. Because she'll notice, she'll see right through him, and it's that forces Phil to change. But since he can't change, he's forced to accept that Rita will never love him. Therefore, his search for meaning in the form of a connection with Rita is hopeless, and his life is now completely meaningless.
Oh, hi, Phil.
I've come to the end of me, Rita. There's no way out now.
So enter the Death compilation. I really like how the movie doesn't actually explain how Phil gets into the time loop to begin with. Movies often over-explain things that don't matter at all, and we'd much rather just be taken into the fantasy instead of being talked to about it too much. Phil trying to find an escape with the Groundhog is his last ride. It's his moment where he's accepted nothing matters anymore and he's hit rock bottom. So he dies. Then he wakes up.
Nuts.
He's hit rock bottom and he's stuck at rock bottom. Again, maybe the movie is telling us that there are never easy solutions like death to our problems. And maybe it's also saying that you can't just wake up the next day and be out of rock bottom. It's like the first day Phil relives Groundhog Day, living it the same way even though he's cognizant that things should be different when everything looks the same. This is the first time I think the movie sends a message without even meaning to. We often wake up every day thinking things will be different, but then we find nothing has changed at all. I think the movie shows how inaction towards problems is the cause of the sameness in your life. Actually, not even just our problems, but just our routines and habits. We are what we continuously do. If we smoke, do you think one day we'll stop smoking? Or if we continuously try to stop smoking, will we stop smoking? A lot of our lives are basic routines and habits that we fall into. The key is to get a handle on them and then add things in. If things are predictable, then we can add in the unpredictable ourselves and try to change things.
What?
At this point in the film, Phil has been in the loop for a very long time. After the Devv compilation, Phil goes to talk to Rita and explain to her that
I'm a god.
he has his show where he predicts everything that's going to happen in the diner, and then she decides to spend the rest of the day with him to figure out what's going on. In the scene where they're throwing cards, he explains that she could master card throwing if you practice for 4 to 5 hours every day for 6 months. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole theory of how long Phil has been in the time loop. There are way better YouTube videos that have more details about that in general. But I will say his hobbies and skills that he's gained indicates a way larger amount of time that's taken place in the loop. I did see a mentioned scene before. I say mentioned because I don't really remember where I had heard it from, but that he had apparently read every book in the library that's in that town, and that would have taken him hundreds of years apparently. But a general idea could be like 100 years. As far as I can tell, Phil has gone through his pleasure seeking, his Rita seeking, and his death seeking within maybe a 6-month period of time. Unless he started throwing cards after the death comp, I don't really know. But anyway, this just shows how long things have gone on for Phil. This also shows just how endless life can feel and how long one can suffer through pain. Our perception of time in our lives is challenged in this film, as much as the meaning that we try and define in our time. I think when I watched this movie when I was younger, I saw how Phil had endless time, and I thought, of course he changed. I mean, if I had all that time, who wouldn't change? But he also had all that time that was filled with suffering. I don't know that it would have been such an easy task to change just because you have more time. There's plenty of people that live very long lives that never change. And I guess Danny Rubin had the same thought. That's why he made the time loop infinite. He wanted to see where the character would go, what he would do, and how he would finally make that change happen. I think a real turning point for Phil is when he spent that night with Rita. He says he doesn't deserve her, and it's this moment where Phil says a line that is an actual reflection of what he thinks of himself. This is the first line of real self-reflection, the first sign of any growth in a positive way. In typical movie fashion, the growth is immediate because we have a runtime to think about. It would have been nice to show how Phil initially gets over doing nice things for people, like he tries and fails a few times and then succeeds and things go perfectly. But I guess instead we see him helping everyone, and his progression is shown through him playing the piano. So Phil goes on to have his nice makeover. As he goes through his change, we see the old homeless man that we'll call Pop, because that's what Phil calls him. In fact, he initially calls him Father. I'm sure there are ideas that Phil didn't have a father growing up or something, and he's trying to make up for the failures of his father by saving Pop's life. But the real lesson for Phil is that no matter what good you try to do, there will still be pain and suffering. He can't save everyone, and he has to learn to accept this pain. Accept that life and death happens, no matter what. Pop's story is placed right before Phil's last day, Phil's perfect day, where you can say he did everything right. When he would have once taken his job for granted, he is now proud to do the news story and impart beautiful words onto the occasion that he once loathed. Where he once wouldn't think about the thousands of people in the town, he helps the same kid falling from a tree, the same woman with a flat tire, the same man choking on steak, the tickets to WrestleMania for the couple, fixing the old man's back, and buying insurance from his friend Ned. He had never before considered the lives of the people around him, and instead, on this perfect day, he helps all of them in a special way. He also has fun playing piano at the party. All of this day has been a culmination of Phil being able to step outside of himself and his life. To go from hating a town that he saw as repressive and halting his progress in life, to giving him emotional maturity, skills, connection, and meaning. If the man that couldn't change lived the same way every day, he probably wouldn't change. But I think the same could be said for the man that has the ability to change and doesn't. It's all about action at the end of the day. Not just going out and doing things, though that is important, but I mean the inner workings of the mind. It takes a long time for Phil to realize that things aren't going to work out for him, that he's not going to get what he wants. It takes a longer time for Phil to not just accept his situation, but to embrace it and make it fruitful for himself. To not just take advantage, but to listen, to look around, to learn. Before, Phil didn't care about any of these people. He would go around the town, make his snarky comments, or avoid people altogether. But as time went on, Phil learned how to talk to people. It didn't really matter to him at first because he was bored. He got to know everyone, and maybe that helped grow Phil's perspective on life. That life is a lot more than his own life and his own problems. Technically to Phil, none of those people's lives matter in the time loop. But Phil cares because he's gotten to know them. His empathy has grown. I used to think it was because he wanted to change for Rita. But really, Phil doesn't change for her. She might ignite the spark for Phil to think about change, but he ends up doing it all himself by connecting with those around him. Even the night Phil and Rita spent together didn't end in romance like he would have wanted previously. Instead, it became a real connection. Phil started his growth before Rita by talking to the community around him. He went to Rita to tell her about him being a god because he wanted to know what she thought, because he cared about her opinion. Phil's ability to change ultimately came from being bored, from wanting to do more, and from exhausting all of his previous options. From hitting his low and then going from there. Even for Phil in his infinite time loop, nothing lasts forever. I think that's probably one of the best lessons that Phil learns in this movie. Not that being bored will solve all your problems, but being without any meaning or purpose in life will make you search for something. If you're at rock bottom, there's only one way to go, and that's up. That struggling is a part of life. That being able to pay attention to the world around you, especially the small things, will open your mind to new experiences and perspectives. Growth doesn't just come from adopting a new workout routine, buying a self-help book, and talking to your health and wellness coach, but it comes from living life. Phil's inability and outright refusal to live his life is what kept him stagnant.
So what are you gonna do?
I think I'm gonna go back to my room and take a hot shower and maybe read and hustle or something.
Suit yourself.
We never knew about the big party going on until the end of the movie. We didn't know a wedding was happening that day. We didn't know those things until the movie told us about them, until Phil went searching for more. Just like in our own lives, We don't know what is happening out in the world unless we are out there to experience it for ourselves.
A lot of my life has been spent hiding in one way or another. I've always felt like I wasn't good enough and that I was behind in life. I thought I couldn't do anything for myself. Only recently in years have I been able to see a therapist and been able to work through these thoughts and come up with answers to my problems in life. Otherwise, I felt alone. I felt like I had to figure everything out on my own. Like I wasn't able to live my life until I figured out things for myself. But there's a trick that depression plays on you. It makes you think that you have to be alone, and if you could just figure out your problems, then you could be fine. But really, if you don't have the tools or the people in your life to help you, then you're really not going to be able to change. Therapy helped me work through my thoughts and struggles that were holding me back in my life. Of course, at the end of the day, it was still up to me to make the right choices and to put in the work to be able to change. But I needed to be able to talk to someone that could help me. I needed the support. I needed the tools like journaling, walking, being out in nature, and positive self-talk to help me subdue the suffering that I was causing for myself. Hiding was big for me, not only just with my feelings, but also just like hiding in my room. Currently I'm at the park, and I've never come here more than I have this past summer. My point is this: life is all around us, and if we resist life, we might end up feeling like we're living the same day over and over again. I think it's very possible to create your own Groundhog Day for yourself, even if it doesn't last forever. I recall these words from Uncle Iroh: life happens wherever you are, whether you make it or not. This was in his response to Zuko saying that Bossing Say felt like a prison to him. If that's the case, then we just have to be open, willing to listen, willing to look around and notice things that are around us. Change is sometimes required. If doing the same thing over and over again is insanity, then change is the solution. It doesn't have to be big changes at all either. The smallest things can sometimes have the greatest impacts in your life. That's why they tell you to start making your bed and not cleaning your entire room in a day. Or just do something different during the day. You always get the same drink at the coffee place or at the gas station. Get a new one. Try something different. Try something new and fun. It never has to be big. It just has to be different.
The movie ends with Phil waking up to a new day. The first new day he's had in a very long time. Rita is by his side, and Phil realizes that things are different. Anything different is good. Phil is excited to live his new day, his new life, and to love Rita. I suppose they might have actually fallen in love at the end, though for the level-headed Rita to do that may be slightly out of character. But I also believe that this is her being open with the world, and she's made a real connection with Phil, because again, she watches everything he does and says to people. I think whether or not she actually loves him doesn't matter. The first new thing he wants to do is something for her.
Is there anything I can do for you today?
Whereas the first interaction was just him being a jerk.
You are new, aren't you? You know, people like blood sausage, too. People are morons.
Nice attitude.
From the man that couldn't change to the one that did. There's not a lot left I have to say. Groundhog Day is a unique story. It's not just about telling the same events, but looking at them and revisiting them through a new perspective. When it's the mind's job to learn, adapt, and grow in an ever-changing world, what happens when that world doesn't change? You stop and look around at everything. It focuses a broader perspective. Phil only has one goal in mind initially, and that's to move up in his job. He then wants Rita, but that may never happen. Phil is success-oriented, so everything small and quaint around him, the town of Punxsutawney, doesn't matter and is easily overlooked. It's just a stop to bigger and better things. A step on the ladder to his great success in life. Only once he gets there, for him to keep climbing higher, because he can never truly be satisfied in life. Phil is selfish after all. So it's hard for him to see worth and success as something separate. He thinks the Groundhog story is beneath him after all, and it's only once he's forced to reflect on his situation, his life, his demeanor, and his bad behavior does he then begin to actually grow. He's done all the hedonism, the death, the self-hatred. When he really fails, when he really can't change, and when he figures out he can't change, he wonders how and where to go from here. So then he does start to look more openly at things. He looks around at the world and presumably he takes his time. He's searching for the answer and he's open to it all. As he's more open to it, we learn things and possibilities that Phil misses out on previously that we didn't know about until he was more open. Phil would previously just go to bed at the end of the day, but instead there's a big fun party at the end of the night that he gets to go to and be involved in. There's a wedding that happens as well. The same goes for Rita. He misses out on the wonders of that relationship to chase pleasure from other women and even what he initially thinks is love from Rita. The same could be said about his friend Ned. The director Harold Ramis talks about how he got a letter from the psychiatric community. They said that the movie is a lesson in psychoanalysis and how we often live the same patterns every day and how we have to break from those everyday patterns. I think that's pretty true from the most part because we are creatures of habit. We want things to be the same because if something is predictable, then it's easier and it's comfortable. But even if we are at max comfort, I think it harms us. Even if we don't have the problems that Phil does, though I do think that helps with the overall point of the movie. Ramis also talks about the perspective of the movie through the lens of being a Jew and how Jews read the Torah starting at the same time every year and ending at the same time every year. He says that revisiting a story isn't just about learning the story, but understanding from different points and perspectives in your life. You can read it as a child all the way to an elderly man. Through being on your own for the first time in college, to falling in love, to having children, to experiencing loss of loved ones. A story might be repetitive, your life might be repetitive, but that doesn't mean it has to be. That also means that the stories we experience throughout our lives will also help us gain new perspectives and revelations as we live our complicated lives. This video was hard to make, as the story is so simple and yet so complex. Rewatching this movie over my life, I've come away with so many new things to think about, so many new perspectives and such good advice at times that I've needed it. I have other movies and shows I've had similar experiences with that I watch from time to time as well. If you guys have any stories or experiences like that, then please share them in the comments. I'd love to read about them. Thanks for watching.